you may have on flood insurance and other issues related to floodplain management, ordinances, and permitting. We have this Bill Bradfield from FEMA, Emily Hattershell, and Ken Roberts from PEMA. And I'll turn it over to Emily, and Emily can go ahead and take it from there.
I just want to say thank you for Lower Makefield for having us here tonight. We have the opportunity to speak to any residents that kind of is having questions in regards to some of the things that come with floodplain management, regulations, the NFIP insurance. Some of that can be really crazy, and just trying to find exactly an understanding of what exactly you're dealing with. Because we know in Pennsylvania, flooding is the #1 hazard that we have. So we know that it's trying for a lot of residents. So brought in our FEMA representative here for the NFIP insurance. He used to be the former state NFIP coordinator for Pennsylvania. And our new NFIP coordinator is Ken Roberts. Ken Roberts actually comes with building codes experience, so he brings a lot to the table as well. So I am surrounded by a really great team of people that can answer those questions that you might have. So what we wanted to do tonight is do something a little bit more informal. We want you to bring us what your questions are. What do you want to talk about? We can talk about anything, be blue in the face, talking to you about regulations, about what you can do, you can't do, you know, all the fun stuff that goes with it. But what we want to do is make this productive for you, for everyone that's either on the Zoom, on the Facebook, whatever it is in the room. How can we help you? What can we do? What can we explain to help you kind of understand? We know your frustration. We've been there, we've lived it. So how can we help you through this, through what's going on? So does anybody have anything to start?
Yeah, and I do want to point out, hi, Bill Bradfield, FEMA Region 3, flood insurance specialist. But if you are here, we do have insurance specialist contact forms in the back because of privacy reasons and access to the database and stuff. I can't look into specific questions, but if you want to fill one out, I know we talked about it earlier. You know, give us your contact information and we will follow up with you directly, and we can do any kind of deep dive that we need to do. And if anybody does come in to the township with any of those questions, we can leave those forms there. And as they fill them out, they can send them to us. And that way we can do a targeted follow-up.
So before we throw Kim under the bus here and make her come up and speak to us, there is a bunch of brochures and everything that has to do different things about flood insurance and mitigation and whatever else. There's a bunch of brochures that are back for those in the room. They're in the back table here, but we're also going to leave those here for the township as well. So the township will have them here if you want to see what those are. There are a lot of forms that are available online. We just have the printed versions here. So kind of keep that in mind for anyone that's on Facebook, on Zoom, whatever else. Those in the room can grab them. Those that are online, they can go ahead and come into the office and get them as well. That way the township has them here. Kim, we're going to have you come up.
So I live along Brock Creek. We purchased our home in November of 2019. Just after settlement, looked into the options for flood insurance. We're not considered to be in a flood zone, so it's not required. An initial quote was around $800 or so, but we had a few things to do with the house. We put it off, started to look into it again, and very quickly through private insurance brokers, kept getting repeatedly denied at underwriting. Yep, we can do a policy for you. Here's the quote. And normally within an hour, I would get an email, a phone call, and say it's denied at underwriting. Worked with an insurance agent at one point. They went through, the NFIP. They gave me a quote. They took a deposit. They came back again within an hour or so and said my only option was FEMA non-preferred, $3,900 a year, which is almost 4 times my homeowner's insurance. They informed me that there would probably need to be multiple properties impacted in order for me to even file a claim, and it may not be worth it at that point. So that's what I've been facing. We've been in our home for 4.5 years. There's been about 4 floods that have actually reached the property itself. So a little frustrating.
No, and I know we talked a little bit before we got started, and we'll do some follow-up. I'm not surprised with what you heard in 2019 versus going back and getting a quote later on in 2021 into 2022. The NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, went through a major overhaul. It was the first major update in almost 50 years, where it was the way that policies were rated. It's called risk rating. It used to be called risk rating 2.0. We now call it the NFIP pricing approach. And what was looked at was that the previous way of rating policies was a little antiquated. It was maybe state of the art back in 1972, but not in 2021. We've now modernized how we rate policies, and we look at many factors. You look at catastrophic risk modeling. So I know it's a very long way of saying what I'm hearing is in 2019, using the old rating method, it said $800. We didn't know what the risk was because you weren't in a flood zone. So it was really just driven by your premium and your coverage, or your deductible and your coverage. If you're seeing an increase to $3,900 now, that's probably saying one of two things. One, you're at a very high flood risk that is not shown on the FEMA flood maps, which it sounds like it is. If you're experiencing all those floods, but you're not in the flood hazard area,
2%.
you're in the 0.2%, right? So you're in an area of risk, higher risk, but not
Not the risk.
not the where the flood insurance would become mandatory. But we've also seen, and this is where I want to do the follow-up, that sometimes if there's an error made in the way that maybe the data was entered when the policy was written, that there can be some play right there. So I definitely want to do follow-up because I understand the frustration and work with you to see if we can get it down, because obviously I think you see the value of having it. It's just cost prohibitive, and affordability is a big concern.
Yeah, and thankfully we've not had significant losses that would justify a claim. We do have our major utilities are elevated. We've mitigated as much as we possibly can,
Sure.
but that doesn't stop it from coming.
No, exactly. And I applaud you for doing that self-mitigation. In a lot of cases, it's not something that you may get credit for on the insurance side, but it's peace of mind knowing that you're not going to have to keep replacing the water heater or the boiler every time there's water in the basement. But I definitely want to make sure. And I know you also mentioned this question about there would have to be enough claims.
Yeah,
To make it worth
I was
it.
informed or told that there would need to be multiple claims in order for us to have an approved, for us to have multiple properties impacted for us to have an approved claim. And that $3,900 a year, I might as well just put it in the bank in case I have something I need to spend it on rather than using it for insurance.
Yeah, that's one of our concerns sometimes when we hear information like that, because really to make a claim, you have to satisfy two requirements for a flood. It either needs to be 2 or more properties or 2 or more acres if it's on the same property. And from talking with you earlier, it's definitely the 2 or more properties, but it really should not be dependent on any other claims around you. That's why you have insurance. It's because we've seen instances where there might be only one home on a block that has flood insurance. They can make a claim if they get flooded. There's no reason, no one else around them is going to make a claim because they don't have the flood insurance. It's not going to prohibit them from doing that. So, and we hear sometimes information is misconstrued, and they might be thinking 2 or more properties and then they say 2 or more claims, but yeah, I don't want you to.
Well, they said multiple. So I said, well,
Multiple.
I have one neighbor that's at a similar low elevation.
Yeah.
No other properties around me are at such an elevation that they're impacted. So there's 2 properties.
Yeah.
And when I noted that, they said that probably would not be enough.
Interesting. Okay.
So this is why we're doing this so we can try and get that information.
No, 100%. And we work closely with the Pennsylvania Insurance Department. As part of the task force that I think everyone's aware of right now, the Pennsylvania Flood Insurance Premium Assistance Task Force. Did I get that right? It's a mouthful. But that's one thing we're trying to also do is that there's a multi-tiered approach here, and it's education, but there's also agent education, realtor education, lender education, homeowner education, training. You know, there's many different layers here because it's not uncommon that we hear after a flooding event, oh, I was told I can't get flood insurance, or I was told I don't need it. Both of those are incorrect. That's not something I want to hear an agent say to anyone. It's not to denigrate agents. They're, you know, they have a job to do. It's just, if an agent doesn't want to write flood insurance policies, I would rather them just say, hey, look, this is not something I feel comfortable with, but here's someone you can. Don't give misinformation. Just don't give information. Just pass someone on. So but I appreciate you bringing that, because those are good to know, because when we hear those things, we can take them to the insurance department and they can follow up, because they do track that. So anything else, or?
I think the only thing that's come to mind is you mentioned the change in the modeling for the rates,
Yes.
the NFIP, and $3,900 is pretty steep.
Yes.
Is there anything underway to consider if that is an accurate figure that was provided to make it more affordable?
That is the $1 million question. So the Premium Assistance Task Force is one thing that was created. That's something that FEMA is looking at. We actually have an affordability framework, we call it. It's a document that FEMA put together back in 2018. They provided it to Congress and said, here is a means-tested approach to making flood insurance more affordable. We can't do it alone. We need congressional approval to make those kinds of changes, but it's something we're very aware of. The first big hurdle was we had to have insurance that was based on actuarially sound data, hence the move to the new one, the new pricing approach. So we fixed that part of it, but now that we've got a model that we know works, we need to go back and look at the affordability concerns. In the meantime, while that's all being hashed out, there's the community rating system. It's a program, a voluntary program, where communities can enter. And if, they adopt higher regulations, they actually will see a reduction in the flood insurance premiums based on the points. Yardley is here. They're well-versed in CRS. So that is a big boost to, affordability right now before we can get congressional approval. Something else you might want to think about is, I feel like, I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking. I forgot. I wanted to say, no, that's perfect. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because I meant to say Yardley's also here, but so no, but it should be commended for a level, CRS class 7. So, that is something too, with the change to the new pricing approach. In the past, the biggest discounts went to those properties of flood insurance in the special flood hazard area, regulatory floodplain. Now, any NFIP policy gets the same discount regardless of whether it's in or out of the floodplain. So, the 15% is across the board. It's not just those properties in the floodplain. But and I think, other things you can think about, which can be challenging, but playing with the deductibles, that can always be challenging. But I know we've talked with folks who say, I can't afford the flood insurance, but my house hasn't flooded in the 50 years that we've had it. In that case, maybe if they're so confident that it's not going to flood, maybe they can raise the deductible to, $10,000 and live with it. And that makes it more affordable. But buyer beware, if they have the flood before they can use the insurance, they're going to have to come up with 10,000. So, it's something to think about. And you also mentioned something that I've heard a lot of folks do, where, kind of saving the money for rainy day funds. Self-insurance is a way to go, right? So, as long as you're diligent with being, putting the money away, then there's no strings attached to it at all. Not that there is with insurance, but you can use it for anything that you need to, whereas you might be limited on some of the insurance. So I don't want to talk you out of insurance, but in a situation where it's not mandatory, you have a little bit more flexibility And I'm sure you probably,
We had a wall to replace, so that's where that.
right. Yeah. Yeah. But I know we'll do some more follow-up though, because I want to, make sure that we answer some of your more specific questions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
My name is Larissa Luzecki. I live in Lower Makefield Township. During the last July 2023 flood event, I almost lost my home. We don't live in a floodplain, so we have no flood insurance. This was our fourth flood. And unfortunately, they're more frequent. And this one was a lot more severe. I could tell you honestly, although we appreciate your efforts, I don't want flood insurance because it's a cost that I feel like I should not have to bear myself. It's nice to have help with cleanup, but as you know, with flooding, it's not just the cleanup, it upturns your whole life. And from the last July, it was months and months of recovery. So flood insurance, okay, and we lost all our appliances because it was such a substantial amount of water that entered our home. That if not for the kindness of a local church that helped us, we wouldn't have been able to replace everything. Unfortunately, FEMA did let us down. We didn't get a penny. 2 years ago, when we did have the flood, it was wider spread. So we met the threshold. So we were able to get a little bit of help, but we were unfortunately left penniless from FEMA. So that doesn't leave us with much confidence in our government agencies. The threshold, I think, is something you may want to think about evaluating because that just wasn't fair to us. And it impacted so many more neighbors, but just in our immediate area that regardless of how many neighbors did report it, we couldn't beat the threshold. So we got nothing. I don't know how you can convince me that flood insurance would be an option for us, but I know talking to our neighbors as well, we don't want it. We don't want it. It's not we feel like we've been living it, and I've been living in that home for 30 years, 4 floods. And again, I have to reiterate, they're getting worse. The township has really been responsive, cleaning up, watching everything. They hired land studies, which was a godsend. So with those efforts, I think it should be more rather than the state of Pennsylvania investing in looking to put the burden on us, but actually turning it back to the state. How can the state help our local municipality control this? There are many reasons why we're getting flooded. We're at a very low point in our area, in our watershed. We're actually in our own watershed. And it's been years of neglect and overdevelopment, basically those two things. So based on that, we're getting flooded, and now I have to buy insurance just to kind of be on the back end. But meanwhile, we need the water kept away from us. So that's the position we're in right now. And it's a very uncomfortable situation. And we keep hearing about flood insurance, which has its advantages. It's not the only way for us to get out of this. It's a wider scale. And I have to commend our township that they are being very responsive. We see that there's always constant work being done around us. And we're hoping it's going to be enough. We don't know. The last couple of rainfalls, it seemed like it was controlling the water. We didn't see anything near us, but I don't know what to do. We don't know what to do except abandon our property, leave. But we cannot go through the stress, the headache, the financial burden of another flood than what we had in July. And granted, that was a substantial amount of water that was unprecedented, but who knows what we're faced in the future. So what do we do?
There's a lot of great things you mentioned in there. And I do flood insurance. And I do it because we see the benefit of it over and over again, because in a true flooding event, it usually is flood insurance that comes closest to making people whole. But I realize that it's a personal decision, and I completely understand all your concerns, and and you're entitled to choose whether or not you want it. But I think you're talking to a much bigger issue that I am hoping the state and that everyone looks at, aside from like the thresholds for the disasters and all that, because that's out of our control, that, you know, it's unfortunate. What I do want to say to that, and please, anytime, we are seeing higher intensity freak storm events, just like the one that affected Bucks. While folks were in Bucks County, we had damage assessment teams down here. I was in Northampton County doing damage assessments for the same reason. It was the same thing, you know, super localized, where it was terrible where it was, but it was not going to meet the threshold. But we wanted to make sure we accounted for it. We had teams in Lehigh County. We did it in Lackawanna, Luzerne. So we're out there a lot, but we're not seeing them get to those thresholds. So that is something that I think needs to be looked at. But what I think, speaking more to the challenges of moving forward, is this community watershed approach to water use and land management that has not really gained a lot of traction with a lot of communities. And I think that that is a major problem that we're facing right now. I live in a community that is the same thing. It's at the very end of a watershed. They're a CRS community. They are very proactive. They do everything they can, but they cannot help the tremendous amount of water that comes from all the agricultural communities upstream that don't care. And they're basically staring down the barrel of a gun, doing everything they can. And I think that that is something that we really need to look at, especially in Pennsylvania. It's challenging with our Commonwealth system and so many municipalities and townships that, you know, Lower Makefield can do a fantastic job of what it's doing up to its edge. But who's upstream? Are they doing that? And so I don't have an answer for that, but I think you raise a very valid point that I think that's something that I would hope. I know it's on, you know, PEMA's radar, you know, the radar, but looking at how do we increase the awareness of kind of reaching across these municipal boundaries and realizing that, you know, maybe that Amazon fulfillment center upstream, even if the stormwater control meets all the DEP requirements, may not be the best idea. Development in the floodplain, you know, we saw with Ida, you know, I was, you know, down along the areas and like along the Schuylkill. I mean, there's so much development going on right up on the edge. Is it compliant? Yes. Should it be there? It's easy for me to say no, but I think that that's a lot of these issues, and so we're kind of facing it on multiple levels. I want you guys to make sure you speak, but I don't want to. I completely understand your concerns, because you know it's a challenge, and you see it firsthand.
Well, it seems that Pennsylvania as a state, I mean, profit is always king, but Pennsylvania kind of approaches it in a different way. It doesn't, I would like to think that way. So they do consider, like I know with Lower Makefield, it was talk of the Chamonix Creek, like the neighboring. So it's a cooperative effort. It has to be. We haven't had luck with our other government groups involved. And, you know, we were trying to put, the Lower Makefield Township tried to put in a second storm drain for us, but that was blocked by the Canal DCNR. So that's unfortunate, but if someone could see this as the whole big picture and not just individual, because as you mentioned very correctly, it affects us all, and it's one watershed. Water flows in one direction from one to another. I don't know who can connect the dots, but someone has to.
It's something that we have really been taking a look at, because what we've seen is for so many years, it's always been, okay, we're going to just look at this small section. But the problem is it's everything outside of there. We're looking at everything as a whole. So when we're looking at what's going on in Pennsylvania, we're working with the counties. They have hazard mitigation plans. We need the townships to work with them, put a lot of their concerns in there. Stormwater management is a huge thing, because if you don't have what you need to get that stormwater taken care of with all the development and stuff that you have going on, where's it going to go? It's going to go right over the top of those grates. It's going to shoot right over those pipes. Last year, we were out, and I'm not going to mention anything as far as where we were doing assessments. We had one township that went and put these great, stormwater pipes in and everything else. Well, the problem is the neighboring township that connected onto it, their pipe was a different size. So when it came down through, it shot over top of the new one and completely took out a whole bunch of backyards, left craters, and it actually opened up the whole storm system that they had just put in to manage the stormwater. It went right over top of it because there was a disconnect between the municipalities as far as how they were doing their stormwater management and making sure that everything was kind of, okay, we're kind of on a hill, it's coming down through. We need to make sure that they're working together better. And we've been trying to work through that a lot more. The NFIP program had, been with another agency before. Now it's under emergency management. So we're working, we actually do report to the state hazard mitigation officer. So that guy that's coming out there and looking at these properties, the repetitive losses, substantial damages, and all that's there of seeing what can they do? Can they elevate? Do they want to acquire these so that they can put it back to a natural status to kind of, it's too much of a hazard here. It's too much of endangering life. What can we do to make things better? Looking at those green spaces, those open spaces, the wetlands, trying to preserve those. So we're doing a lot of different things. We're working with a lot of the Delaware River Basin Commission, Susquehanna River Basin Commission. We're working with a lot of those to look at the grants that they can do. Hazard mitigation has a lot of different grants out there. The problem is when you're talking about, like, we say about insurance is the only thing that's going to make you whole, and nobody wants to pay that. Nobody whatsoever wants to have that additional burden on there. But unfortunately, some of the grants that are out there to mitigate those issues that you're having do require you have insurance. Some of them require the NFIP insurance. Some of them just require insurance in general. They want to be able to see, like, residents are taking it upon themselves, like they know their risk, insure your risk, and if that's not enough, then we're going to help you. But also on the individual assistance side, they're looking at additional programs. So what happens when we don't get that declaration? Because of it being such a high threshold, what other programs can we bring in? And those VOADs, like you're talking about, as far as the churches and stuff like that, they are a huge thing. The Red Cross coming in and all of those, we do rely on those agencies being there at the Multi-Agency Resource Center, what we call a MARC. We really do lean on them a lot to be there, get the additional information out, but we are looking at a lot of different avenues to help people, but we're also needing the townships to kind of identify where those hazards are. Their state hazard mitigation, plan that's out there for the counties, that's identifying the hazards in your townships. You have to take that up to the county. You have to make sure that the townships are involved in those. So when you have your officials that are in the townships and everything, are they aware of the situations that's occurring within the municipality? So if somebody just kind of is like, oh, my house floods all the time, but the municipality, the officials, that they're not aware of it, then they can't take that up for that plan as well. And that plan, all the counties have to renew those every 5 years. So those are additional things to kind of look at to see what can we do, what can we identify these types of things. When FEMA goes through and does some of the remapping of the floodplains and everything, a lot of times there's discovery. There is actually not a lot of times. There is always discovery meetings of, okay, they come out, they're like, here are all the maps of the area that we're looking at. Where are the areas that you are having a lot of flooding in your jurisdictions? And Pennsylvania is one of those strange types of states. It's a commonwealth. All the land use authority falls upon the municipalities. So, we do rely a lot on the municipalities to kind of fulfill some of those needs that we have. But as much as we're trying to do as much as we can, there's no quick fix to the situations. So that's why, even if it's just that you're getting some type of a flood insurance for contents, elevating your mechanicals that are in these areas, trying to keep things a little bit higher if you know that it's coming in. Sometimes, if you're not in any type of a floodplain, as far as, the French drains, landscaping is a huge thing. I know when I had moved into one of the other areas, I was on the side of a mountain, and believe it or not, we got a lot of crazy rain coming down through there, and we used to get a lot of rain in our basement. I actually had an excavator come in, kind of shift on how the water's flowing through our yard to kind of put it down into a different area that, one, it wasn't going to affect the other neighbors that were around me, but also it pulled it away from my house. So that way it's not running into the basement. It's not going to those window wells and everything else, to try to see what is out there to possibly do. Because putting culverts in and everything, nobody wants to have to do that on expense on their own properties and stuff like that. But something just as simple as moving some dirt around on your property.
We've done it.
But now in floodplains, don't be moving the dirt around too much
No,
because
but
that causes a little
we-
bit, but when you're
we've been
outside
taking
of that,
Yeah, we've been taking precautions, but this last one, we have a floodgate in our door. That's where most of the water enters in. There's no way we could have estimated it went over and it went through our front door. So again, it was unprecedented, but who knows what's going to happen in the future? But we take all the precautions. There's just so much we could raise. We raised our water heater. You know, our appliances, it's a low ceiling laundry room. We move our cars. We have no place to put our cars, and that's usually the first thing that we lose. So we've been taking these steps. Again, it's out of our control. The water will go, it's going to rush through my yard no matter what I do, no matter what, because it just is too much all at once. And we have drains. We're out there every storm clearing those drains because they collect.
Right.
They collect debris. When
they do.
195 was being constructed, we were getting the construction gear into our drains. So there we were, the four of us clearing out the drains. Up in this high water, we do it all. We do everything we can, to the point that, I mean, it's sometimes very risky to my family, being sucked down in one of those drains, which is a very big possibility.
Yeah, that's extremely concerning. That's, yeah.
We don't have an alternative. When the
Right, you're
drains
being as,
clear, they work. When they're blocked with trash cans and debris, they do not work. If the water needs to go down to get out of my house. And unless we're out there pulling stuff out, it will not. It's just going to stay packed.
and that's what we see, just moving beyond into talking about like sound floodplain management. It's debris, it's maintenance, and you're doing it, but again, it hits to your upstream neighbors. Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you about the amount of times we've seen floods exacerbated because a trampoline or an above ground swimming pool washed down and got caught in a small little culvert that now created a huge dam, and then that let go. So, right. So when it's not happening in other areas, it can make it worse for you. So,
The low point.
yeah.
It's interesting what you said, to make it whole. It's a very interesting term, because when you're experiencing flooding,
There's no way to make things
No.
whole, not when you're
insurance
losing
is not gonna
memories
make
and
you whole.
everything
When
else.
you're getting rid of, like memories, your parents' photo albums, because they're underwater, nothing is going to replace that. Nothing's going to make you whole. So it's an interesting term, but to be used cautiously, because it's not.
I can appreciate that.
Make you whole.
No, you're right. And I do want to caveat that by saying that, one of the reasons we mentioned that statement is only that when we see the amount that's paid out, say we do get a presidential disaster declaration for individual assistance, like we did in Ida, on the order, the average payout when all is said and done is between like $4,000 and $6,000. That's how much goes to the homeowner.
So when we
Um,
talk about making you whole, that's
Yeah,
your structure.
but that's if you didn't have insurance and you made a claim.
Yeah.
If you have the insurance, you might be talking more $70,000, $80,000. Not that that's going to make you whole, but we're an order of magnitude at least getting you closer. So but I don't mean to,
Because it's sensitive. It just happened. I mean, it's going to be a year, but it's still, it's very sensitive to us. That
No,
we feel
I
like we can't
understand
leave
completely.
home, because who knows when the next flood's going to be, that you have to move everything up off the floor. And
No, and I'm sure you watch the weather. I mean, everybody is these days, and what you're saying is not crazy, because we've actually, the state meteorologist at PEMA did an analysis. We've seen it in the Northeast. We've seen a 75% increase in, what is it? I think it's heavy precipitation events, which is like 2 inches over 24 hours or something, more so than any other part in the country. The Northeast is seeing more rain. And somebody mentioned, it was an interesting discussion a couple years ago, but like, you remember when we were kids and it would just kind of rain for like a day or two and it would just water the grass and water the plants? It's like, we don't get rain like that. It just all comes at once now. We have very few like all day soakers, or twice a week, but it's like massive rainstorm, sun comes back, massive thunderstorm a couple days later. It all comes, and it's scientifically shown that that's what we're seeing now. And how do we adapt to that? Because, even like the FEMA modeling, it's all based on historic precipitation data. So even when you get new models, it's hard because we're only basing it on what we've been able to record. And when you start talking about future modeling, we're getting there. But, some people don't want to take a chance on, well, you said what the risk was going to be, but I understand. And I think that that's a very legitimate.
New world, our weather pattern has completely changed since
Yeah.
when I was a kid. But we have to adapt.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everybody is adapting. And
You're adapting at different rates, and that's right. There's not a holistic approach to adapting, and that's what I think we need to change fundamentally. And if we don't, we're going to see similar issues where we're going to have areas that just can't get insurance. I mean, we're already seeing it. I don't know if anyone followed it, but I mean, there are parts of the United States right now where major companies, insurance companies, are not providing homeowners anymore because of hurricane risk or wildfire risk. So if we don't take that approach, we don't want to leave it up to the industries to make these areas uninsurable and force people out, and people can't move in. If you don't mind me asking real quick, have you looked at what flood insurance would be for your property? Have you thought
we have
about it?
not,
Okay, and it's no pressure.
putting 2 kids through college. That's our.
Amen. And I tell people too, I'm a strong believer in what flood insurance does, only because we go into these disaster areas and we see that if you have it, those homes are on the road to recovery faster. But I don't know everyone's situation. So who am I to stand up here and say, wow, based on your story, you're crazy if you don't have flood. That's your decision. And same with me. Like, everybody's got unique factors that play into it. And it seems like you're doing everything. I was more just curious.
We did. I have to step back. I believe we did when we first bought the house. And we were told, you're not in a floodplain, you're not at any risk. But meanwhile, we knew,
Right.
because we're on both sides of the storm drain. So my husband did, and they assured us, no, the problem was corrected.
I'm going to guess this was probably prior to the new methodology.
30 years
30
ago.
years ago. Yeah.
And then soon, like maybe a year after, then we got water into the house.
Just like that. Yeah. And I think this is not really related, but I think another important thing we're going to have to look at is disclosure laws moving forward too. 30 years ago, it wouldn't have helped, but if you were to go and look at that same property today,
Right.
Is there a history of flooding? Maybe, I don't know. But if we improve our disclosure laws, where we're forcing people to say, do you have to have flood insurance? Have you made claims? How much are you paying? Educating buyers to make that. I know, I just wanted to say that. I know it doesn't help you, but I think but so we don't continue to make those mistakes. But I think that I applaud you for doing everything you do, because it's a tough situation, because I don't have an answer in terms of the affordability part and the flood insurance. But
I mean, it's not just us, we're all in the same boat.
But right, you've got a whole community, right, and just being advocates. And I think that we are seeing a pretty, I hate to use the word unprecedented, because it means without precedent, which means never before or ever. But we are seeing a relatively unprecedented amount of money go towards hazard mitigation right now. I mean, they went from 500 million to $1 billion in a year. So there's a lot of money being thrown out there. And the approach is, yes, there are grants to look at elevating homes here or acquiring and demolishing homes here and there. But a lot of these grants are looking at that holistic approach. You can only qualify if you're looking at a more multi-jurisdictional consortium of people coming together to solve a problem. Like, that's the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Grant, BRIC grant, is one of those. And I think that's because you're seeing that situation. We can't do targeted mitigation. We have to do holistic mitigation.
Approached by a company willing to raise our house at our expense,
Yeah.
Okay, that's all fine and good for, Rockefeller, but, we're us. We live in Mapleville. I'm putting 2 kids through college. I had to replace 2 cars this last flood. We're limited.
Yeah.
It can only be stretched so far.
Sure.
And I'm not sure, unless, I think that they did approach it, that they would encourage a couple of houses most affected by the flood, but, you have to get everybody on board, and not everybody was.
Well, it's all voluntary. Yeah, at the end of the day, right? Yeah, can't take somebody's house, but
At the end of the day, it's the financial burden lands on us.
yes, yeah.
And I know that's just the way things happen, but it's just, there's such an injustice to that, because I didn't ask to have my neighbor, I have 3 developments built above me, you know, which is made the problem so much worse for us.
Right.
You know, I didn't ask that 295 be this, you know, from 4 lanes into, you know, what is it, 8 lanes?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure it's affecting us because we sit so low. Oh, sorry. That's all right. So, you know, I mean, it's a quandary for us. Insurance, we have insurance on everything except for flood insurance, because once again, we are not in the floodplain.
There actually is another side. So, you talk about, kind of got left down because of not getting that declaration to get the assistance, but there's another side that people don't see, and what we're seeing right now with Ida. A lot of the things that came from Ida. So when you get that assistance, that individual assistance, and it might be $4,000 or $5,000, you might be on the high end. Maybe you're one of the lucky people, that happen to get 9,000 or something. So what ends up happening with those places is they go into a group insurance. So they'll have flood insurance for a period of time. But the problem is then after that, the homeowner of that structure is required to keep flood insurance up on that, because if they don't, they will never be able, if there's another disaster declared, they will not be able to get that assistance again. And that is a concern because those structures change hands. The new owners aren't aware of it. People at the township change, and it's not followed through. And it is a huge concern. So there is another side of that as well then to kind of, see. But the other thing that I know, and trust me, I understand the whole thing with the flood insurance and the cost and everything and the changes of it. But I think right now, I want to have Bill talk a little bit about ICC coverage. It's an additional part on there that does at least offer some assistance in mitigating or elevating properties if they do have that severe loss or that substantial damage that would occur.
No, I'm happy to. I just want to make sure that you've.
Yeah, I appreciate your help. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
It's my
I'm sorry we don't have a magic answer, because I certainly understand your concern. And I do want you to know, like, at least in the insurance affordability, it weighs heavily on us. It's hard to make something more affordable when we had to fix it first. But, I mean, I've seen congressional testimony where our, deputy administrator holds up the book and he says it's going on 6 years old. There's a way through the insurance part of it, but it's much bigger than that. But I appreciate you coming out and telling this, because I feel for you, because it's.
And there is an aging population out there that are paid off on their mortgages and everything else. They're on a fixed income. They can't afford the insurance. So I've reached out to the Department of Aging as well. So this task force is part of that. So Governor Shapiro is really trying to put something together to see what he can do for Pennsylvania residents and really take a step forward. And this is something new. So we're really hoping to see a lot of rewards come out of this. But like all good things, it does take time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck. Certainly understand. We're going to talk about increased cost of compliance.
Yes, what is it and what can you do with it and how do you get it?
Sure. All right. So if you have a standard flood insurance policy through the NFIP, they do come with what is called an increased cost of compliance. It's automatic with the NFIP policy. And what it is, it's a fee that, is added on and you pay into it. And it does allow you access to up to $30,000 to bring a structure to mitigate after you've been flooded. You don't have to put in $30,000 to take out. I mean, everybody's got the ICC, but it is a nice thing. One of the challenges is $30,000 when ICC was conceived probably went pretty far. In 2024, IC's, $30,000 is not going to get you as far as you'd like to probably get, but it's still money that could be used towards mitigation actions. The challenge with the ICC is that the home has to be declared substantially damaged by the municipality. So the floodplain administrator or whoever is designated needs to come out, do an assessment of the home, and they have to determine that the damage to the home caused by a flood was 50% or more of the fair market value. If that is verified, they can provide a letter. The letter gets sent to the insurance company, and the insurance company will allow for that access to the ICC for the $30,000. What you do with the $30,000, elevate utilities, move stuff, raise stuff, whatever you can do to try to mitigate. But I do want to mention, I know this isn't necessarily for maybe some of the homeowners in here, but for the municipal officials, if you are looking at mitigation grants, you can assign the homeowner or the policyholder can assign the ICC to the community to be used as your local cost share for a federal grant or a hazard mitigation grant. So, if there's a 25% or a 10% cost share, but you get a number of homes, they have NFIP, they've been substantially damaged, you can use that. They can claim ICC and assign that $30,000 to the community, and then the community can use it for the cost share, which is, does help offset things. But I know sometimes we do get some confusion over ICC, but it is accessible. It just does require that substantial damage determination.
Do we have any more questions or anything that would have
You
came
want to
up?
read from some of those that you had, or?
Yes, I believe I'd forward you some questions that I've commonly received from different homeowners and people inquiring about flood insurance and their experience in getting. And I think you've addressed a number of them already. One question with when you mentioned flooding just has to be like 2 properties or more. How do you document that those are flooded? Obviously, the one who has the claim can document it, but how do you document another property if they don't have flood insurance?
Yeah, I think in this case, anytime you make a claim, there's going to be an adjuster that comes out. So you're going to walk the adjuster through the situation, and you could kind of show them where the water came from. Or I am also a big proponent of a picture says 1,000 words. So if you can take a picture of the extent of the water, the height of the water, where the water line is on the house, where the damage is, you can kind of extrapolate out that, yes, that would have definitely crossed into another property. I think I have not heard of any situation where that's been overturned. It's usually most floods of any size are going to cross 2 properties or reach that 2 acres. And it can be flooding from any source. I also want to add too, it's not just riverine or, it could be a water main break. So the water main breaks on the street, water comes down the street through the curbs, through the neighborhood. As long as it's overland flow of water, that's 2 acres or 2 or more parcels affected. That counts.
Another question that I've had is, if you do have a flood and you have a claim, how long does it take to get the insurance funds released after a flood event so that people could start getting things fixed? Or do they get it fixed and then wait for reimbursement? And how long does that typically take?
Yeah, it's hard to put a timeline on it because it usually is kind of an economy of scale based on the size of the event. If it's relatively localized and, so the first thing you're going to want to do is call your insurance company, start the claims process immediately. They're going to assign an adjuster. They're going to tell you what they need. Then you want to photo document everything you can. Serial numbers, receipts, keep everything, take tons and tons of pictures. And then they're going to tell you to start getting rid of stuff. There's no reason to keep carpet, furniture, or any of that, allow that mold to continue and create a health hazard. They just want to see the photo documentation. And then it'll just be a matter of working with the adjuster and providing that information as it's requested. The reason that it's hard to give a timeline is that, based on how big the event is and how many adjusters may be in the area, it could take a couple days or a couple weeks to actually get one because everybody's doing the same thing that you're trying to do, and there's just not enough people. But all told, it could be a couple weeks, but it's hard to tell. It can be a little variable. I also do want to mention, though, that If through the NFIP and some private insurance, there's private out there, and I can't speak to it because we don't have any visibility on it. It's a private, obviously it's in the name. But I know, like, especially with the NFIP and some private, you can be reimbursed for proactive measures. So if you know a flooding event is coming or potential, you can get up to $1,000 for flood prevention methods, or up to $1,000 to move valuables if you have to move them and incur some expense, and you can charge that. It doesn't count as a claim, but you can, access some money to be proactive in the term, in the case of a flooding event.
I know you'd mentioned that people can elevate their utilities and everything. But you said under risk rating 2.0, you don't get credit for that on your insurance premium, or do you?
You can. Yes. Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question because we can clarify that. Under the legacy method, what we call the original, what was around before, there were no mitigation discounts for elevating mechanicals and equipment. It was very limited in what you could do. Under the new NFIP pricing approach, you can get a discount for elevating those mechanicals and equipment. It's just based on the structure type that you have, whether, it's crawl space, basement, a one-story ranch, slab on grade. There are certain elevations you have to elevate the mechanicals to get that discount. So that's one of the benefits of the new pricing approach, the new rating method, is that it's the first time we're actually able to offer that mitigation discount. Whereas before it was really just peace of mind. Now you can get a little bit back, at least on your insurance, if you do that.
Okay. And also, you said that Lower Makefield, as a community rating system community, we get a 15% discount. And that formerly was just for those properties who had NFIP insurance in the floodplain, but now it's extended to any property that has NFIP insurance?
Yeah, correct. It used to be, I forget specifically, but the 5, 10, 15, 20% discount that you would see as you moved up in the class was specific to the special flood hazard area properties. And then there was another scale for the non-special flood hazard area. It wasn't as much. Like the first couple may stay at 5 and then they might move up to 10, but there was a disparity between the two, and that has now been removed. So
that's good.
We don't have to worry about making sense of any of that. 15% is 15% across the board.
So it goes to show you a little bit that FEMA is aware that there's flooding outside of the floodplains.
Well, and I'll add, and I think to probably highlight this, when I got into starting this, about 25% of all of our claims came from outside the regulatory floodplain. We're now up pushing 45%. The number's going up. So we are getting more and more flooding outside of the FEMA mapped floodplain all the time. And that's, once again, they're just maps. Like, they're maps that are based on engineering data, and it's good. Our engineers, like, the modeling, it's good, but it's only as good as the data that we have. And when we can't keep up with changing conditions and funding limitations and everything, so but we are seeing more and more claims coming from outside. We're almost at 50%.
For some properties that maybe didn't have flood insurance, so they didn't file a flood claim, but they've been flooded multiple times, where if they had flood insurance and made the claim, they'd be in a category for higher grants as a severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss property. Can they go back and document those prior claims if they have not filed a flood claim?
No, they can't go retroactive. The repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss definitions for FEMA are based off of our claims data. So if there is no claim for it, it didn't exist.
Okay, so if you had a claim last week and then you got flood insurance a week later, the claim from the prior, okay.
Yeah,
I
right.
just wanted to confirm that.
No, that's a good one. And I think it's an important thing to point out real quick too, that there is a waiting period for flood insurance. So it's typically 30 days. Unless you're at like a loan closing or you transfer, assign a policy to a new home, that's usually, it's immediate. The policy takes effect. But if the average homeowner wants to go out and get flood insurance, they can go get it today, but it's not going to take effect for 30 days. And that is to keep people from turning on the Weather Channel and seeing where a hurricane may make landfall and making a mad dash and everybody grabbing insurance just to make a claim and then dropping it afterwards. So, yeah.
It would be nice.
Oh, I'm sorry. The property, as long as it's insured.
Multiple claims.
It could be multiple claims. Yeah. So,
Structure only.
yeah. But if the previous owner had NFIP and made claims and you have NFIP, even if it's a different policy number and everything and are making claims, we have that in our system. So we can keep track of that.
Yeah, we have names, we have policyholder names, but we're not looking at the names. We're looking at the structure itself to see, okay, how many times has this happened to this property? You know, what's the amount that's there? Or how many times has it been in a 10-year period, in a 5-year period? What's going on with this property?
No, that's a good question. Yeah. And that's something we encourage people. I mean, if anybody that's listening, if you have flood insurance and you're looking to move, and you're taking advantage of maybe some discounts or some, grandfathering that might be applicable to your policy, you can assign that policy to the new owners and keep those discounts. That's something we see happen a lot is someone's like, I'm moving and they drop their flood insurance. The new owners come in and they have to pick up the flood insurance. Well, it comes in as a new policy. They lose any type of discounts that may have been in place before they come in at the full actuarial rate. So we try to advocate if people are selling their homes and they have flood insurance, ask them like, hey, transfer your policy to the new owners. So any, discounts they could take advantage of.
One thing you had mentioned before is the disclosure. And I know Pennsylvania has some requirements on disclosure about flooding. Has Pennsylvania considered increasing those requirements for disclosure? I know some other states like New Jersey has a few extra things that I think would help safeguard. Yes. And I was wondering if Pennsylvania had been considering that, or is that part of the flood insurance premium assistance task force?
Nailed it.
Duty.
If only someone mentioned that to the premium assistance task force. No, I did that. Yeah. I mentioned that. I said, there are ways to look at premium assistance many different ways. Money is one of them. But two things I think that you can really do is if we improve the education and the capacity building of floodplain managers in Pennsylvania so that we're building compliantly and doing what we need to do, especially, floodplain management, watershed management. But if we also improve our disclosure laws to make them like New Jersey and New York's, which are pretty strong, and North Carolina's is another one that's really strong, I think that's going to do a lot for premium assistance because we're not putting people in situations where they have to pay exorbitant flood insurance because they didn't know until they got to closing and found out. And people don't want to hear it, but I guarantee it happens because we got the calls. We still do.
We still get the calls.
We still get the calls.
We get the calls as they're sitting at that table trying to do their closing and signing the paperwork. And hey, by the way, you also need to have flood insurance. Do you have proof of this?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we're getting a phone call.
But, like New Jersey's, the ones that I'm seeing now, the improved disclosure, it's, do you live in a flood zone? Are you required to carry flood insurance? What is your premium? How many claims have you made? They can go back and look at historic claims. I think that's where we need to be because people can still purchase that house, but they are fully aware of the risk when they do and the requirement to carry flood insurance. And if they're fine with that, that's on them. And at least we've educated them. The thing that breaks my heart is when people are going after and they're finally, settling on their dream house and, everything looks like it's working and they've crunched all the numbers and they get to closing. And because of inadequate disclosure, they are now, the house is ill affordable.
Yeah. Those ones, we've seen them sitting and looking at $6,000 and $7,000 a year policies. So because not transferring over from a prior NFIP policy, It's coming in at a new rate, and they are looking at that going, oh my gosh, their hopes and dreams and everything else have gone down the tube, trying to figure out how to come up with this, how to scramble around to get the insurance. And it's heartbreaking. It is. We get the calls. I mean, Bill's been in the position that Ken and I are in. We've gotten those calls so many times at the state, and we're trying to figure out how we can kind of help. And with Bill being in this role before and speaking out in regards to it, I mean, we do try to talk to realtors. What we don't want to do is hurt people's property value by having the disclosures out there. But we also, our biggest thing is protecting life. How can we, help these people? How can we make the awareness out there? We do an education outreach for some of the realtors that are dual licensed in Maryland and Pennsylvania. We do it every year to try to talk to them and get them to understand. There are different disclosure laws out there for FEMA Region 3 states. And we try to show them different things, but ours is even though ours is one of the better of our region, it's still very vague. And what can we do to help? We try to get the awareness out to people in general. The same thing with, does everybody know that you can actually get flood insurance as a renter? That is a huge thing. Those people that are living in those basement rentals and those lower levels, they don't know that they can actually go and get flood insurance. And try and get that awareness and that education out there. It's a struggle sometimes in trying to hit those people, because those are a lot of times a lot of our impoverished community that are living in those types of areas. It's cheaper rent because they know that there's problems there. The landlord may have flood insurance on the structure itself, but that renter can actually get content insurance, because we've seen it too many times doing some of our assessments where they have renters, they have lost everything and there is nothing they can do. Renters insurance isn't gonna cover it, just like the flooding for the homeowners, it's not gonna cover it. So it's trying to see how we can educate and get them aware, educate the realtors to help them understand, like, we're not trying to hurt your business of selling these properties because they're in a high hazard area, but we want to make you more reputable. We want to make sure that you are educating your buyers on what they're buying into, what the risk is involved. We don't want to take money away from homeowners because their property value is going down either, but we're just trying to find that equal balance for education. And that's the biggest thing. People are always going to want to live near the water. It is, everybody wants to be able to see that, but they don't want to live near it when it's a raging, flash flood that's coming through, ripping all kinds of stuff away from their home. So it is a concern. And I think the task force is really going to try to make some of these changes occur, but changing disclosure forms, that's takes a little more than just somebody, saying, hey, we should change this. Takes a little bit more.
But hey, we should change it. So
we definitely do need to make it a little bit.
and I know the first question I had, and I think you already addressed that, but if you are not in a floodplain, you can still get NFIP flood insurance. Okay. And we just have to try to make sure we hook people up with an agent who's knowledgeable enough to know that and assist them in getting that.
Yes. Yeah. So under the NFIP, almost anyone anywhere can get flood insurance. There are some limited exceptions. If the building is completely over water, not insurable, but it kind of is, a no-brainer.
During a non-rainy event.
Yeah. Or structures that are, completely underground, once again, high flood risk. But outside of that, which I don't think is probably Lower Makefield's issue, anybody anywhere can get flood insurance. And we want people to know that, because we do hear too often, I was told I can't get it. On the private side, they do have the ability to, choose, like in your case, sometimes they just say the risk isn't worth it. So they won't, once the underwriters take a look, that's a challenge. I will say that, the private market has started to find niches where they can be successful in insuring properties. It's not across the board, but, there's always the NFIP.
We have a few cases where you have an unoccupied house, it's dilapidated. They drop their flood insurance. They don't live there, but it's a house in the floodplain. And, they keep inquiring, can I get a grant or demolition and reconstruction? But I know you have to have flood insurance through NFIP to be eligible for the federal grants. But can they get a flood insurance policy on a house that is unoccupied and dilapidated so that later they can in the future qualify for a grant? It's kind of an odd question, but
No,
we do have a few of those.
it's good. I like those. No, so the definition of a structure for NFIP is it has to have at least 2 outside rigid walls, an attached roof permanently affixed to a site. So if it meets that criteria, it would be an insurable, and that includes buildings under construction as well. You know, you can get NFIP insurance on buildings under construction. So as long as that dilapidated building has 2 walls and an attached roof, that's something I would want to check, just the level of it. But if it meets that criteria, it should be insurable.
Okay.
I do want to, real quick though, because you mentioned an interesting point. If it's not a primary residence, the insurance will be slightly higher because there's a surcharge on the insurance that came out of some legislation back in 2014. And so this $25 surcharge goes on primary residence. Everybody, secondary residence gets a $250 surcharge. So, you know, they do incentivize primary residents. Our goal is to help people when that's their only home, is to make it as affordable as possible. So it could be slightly more expensive. And one of the other challenges, and I don't want to speak too out of term, but I know, having worked with the mitigation folks and Tom Hughes, the state hazard mitigation officer in Pennsylvania, is when it's a secondary home, it's challenging to mitigate because there is quite a list of, we have much more need than funding. So anytime funding is available, we're going to prioritize a primary residence over a fishing cabin or a house at the beach or anything like that. So not saying you can't, but if it's a secondary home, the chances of mitigating through hazard mitigation grants is probably a slim possibility.
I know you mentioned substantial damage where, based on an assessment after a flood, it would be declared by the township that a property has been damaged to a degree of 50% of the value. That's the value, market value of the structure itself, not including the land, correct?
Correct. Yep, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so coming from the municipal level myself, going out and doing substantial damage assessments is quite challenging. Obviously, you're going out, you're looking at someone's house after they've just had the worst time in their life, and you're looking to tell them whether or not their house is so damaged that it must be brought into full compliance with the local ordinance. Also, you're looking to see if you can't get them more monies through the ICC funds and so forth. From a municipal level, typically you want to stay with one means of deciding what the value of the structure is, the value of the home is. I typically went with the county assessment office and used that across the board for every house that we looked at. There's other ways you can certainly have home assessments done. If they don't agree with the evaluation that you gave them from the tax office, they can go out and essentially appeal that and get their own assessment, and they can then use that. Sometimes people want the house to be substantially damaged. Sometimes they're trying to avoid that so they don't have to elevate it. If they're looking for the ICC monies, certainly they're going to welcome that letter so that they can get that monies and hopefully work to get it more resilient. But yes, from the municipal side of things, it's a very difficult process to carry out. It's a very fragile point in time in everyone's lives, and the communication there needs to be very soft-handed, I guess, basically. It's also very daunting for the local municipality, depending on what their resources are, who they have available to go out and make these assessments. If it's one person, and depending on the size of the flood, it can be weeks to months till they're done. That's why we do encourage municipalities to kind of perform some outreach to see who would be available to volunteer at that time. Preferably people that aren't going to be affected by the flooding, that may be willing to come out, get some training, and when the time comes, go out and help the municipality do the substantial damage assessments. That is permitted. It's actually encouraged. Your streets department is going to be busy clearing debris. The police department's going to be busy. The fire department's going to be busy. So try to look and see what you have out there to create a team and do. I would prefer annual training to ensure that when the time comes, they're ready to hit the ground running. You also want to make sure, just like interviewing a person for a job, that the people that you're selecting for your team are going to go out there with some level of tact. Like I said, it is a very challenging time to go out and approach someone and discuss their home and their damage with them.
So from, the municipality standpoint, when residents, say that, oh, we're looking for that substantial damage determination, as kind of like what his perspective is this is what the municipality actually will go through in order to come out there and make that assessment. So there's a lot involved other than just, okay, oh, your house looks really bad, let me go ahead and give you this letter. There's a lot involved in that process too. So a lot of the things that they're looking at and what the municipality has to do.
Not done yet.
Oh, that's good.
I know we have some people, their house is in the floodplain. They have flood insurance. In some cases, they don't have flood insurance, and they want to improve their home. Now, I know we have the substantial improvement threshold. If you can maybe explain that, it's pretty similar to substantial damage. And I like your answer regarding the market value and how to determine it. We use the county assessment data as our baseline, although sometimes you look at it and it's just obviously wrong. But what method would you recommend? A full appraisal or?
So I would typically request the contractor's appraisal in writing, itemized, to show that I'm capturing all the items that should be in there, and that potentially I can remove some items that shouldn't be in that assessment. In doing so, it also helps to sit down and have a conversation with the homeowner to explain why we're including, A, B, C versus anything else within that quote. The labor has to be included, which is also a very touchy topic typically. The majority of the time when they're in the floodplain and they want to improve their home, they're going to come in and say, okay, here's my project. Here's what I want to do. I'm going to put an addition on. It's going to cost me $5,000. And I look and I'd say, well, that's very unlikely. Can you tell me how you got there? Well, I'm going to get the volunteer labor. Some people are going to donate some of the supplies, and ultimately it's coming down to a free addition. Unfortunately, that's not what we can allow to happen. Typically at that point, we would go to the International Code Council's website, and we would use their charts, which says based on the square footage that you're adding or renovating or what have you, and depending on what jurisdiction you're in, this is the price per square foot to do that project. So if they're unable or unwilling to give us, the labor cost and so forth, that's another way that we would go towards finding out what the project should cost. And to be honest, even as a building code official with people outside of the floodplain, a lot of times that's what happens anyway, because people try to save money and a lot of permits are based on the cost of the project. So it's something that building code officials are typically very familiar with. And so that's another way to go to as well, outside of that tax assessment office.
Okay. And I guess if they're under the substantial improvement threshold, but whatever they build has to be as flood compliant as possible. I think that's typically what
everybody in the floodplain, everybody has to follow your floodplain ordinance, whether it's substantial improvement or not. If they're in that floodplain ordinance or if they're in that floodplain and they want to add a new furnace, at that point in time, what you should be doing is making sure that when they add that new furnace, it's at least 18 inches above the base flood elevation, so that they're compliant with the ordinance essentially. If they were substantially improving that house, well, then the entire house would have to come up to 18 inches or better above the base flood elevation, if possible. The reason I say if possible, a townhouse can't be elevated unless you're going to take all your neighbors up with you. So in that case, right. So, and I've run into that, but in that case, so you want to do the best compliance possible. So, okay, put the water heater into the second floor into a closet, put the furnace up into the attic, the outside condensing unit, maybe, hang off the side of the building. That all works, and that's as compliant as you can be. And the wording is in your ordinance that says you can stop there because you just can't elevate the entire house. But yes, any work that anyone is doing in the floodplain should be by the book with your ordinance. As far as projects, so you're talking about substantial improvement, depending on your ordinance, whether it has the cumulative substantial improvement or not, that can change things. So if that wording is in there and somebody comes in one year and they want to put a roof on the house, you have to keep that record, obviously, in perpetuity. The next year they come in and they want to renovate the kitchen. Those two projects together may come to 50% or greater of the property's value. So at that time, they would have to come into compliance with the floodplain ordinance in its entirety and potentially have to elevate the home. Most municipalities tend to shy away from the cumulative substantial improvement. So I'm not that familiar with yours to know if it's in there or not, but if it is, that's another thing that you would have to look at. You would have to keep a running tab essentially of all of the improvements that have happened at that property over typically a 10-year period.
Yeah, and we do keep track of that. And I believe we do have the cumulative.
Yeah. So if they trigger that, then at that point in time, otherwise many municipalities will come in and say, hey, I want to do an addition and I want to do my kitchen over. And they'll kind of say, well, let's do the addition, this year and the kitchen next year. And it's perfectly fine if that's the way the ordinance is written. But like I said, if you have cumulative in there, you have to monitor all of that and enforce it when it hits that 50% threshold.
Now, I know you mentioned a roof, and I've heard different things from different people that I think like maintenance activities are excluded. And I've been told that you have to count the roof. And I've been told by other people that you don't count a roof replacement because you're not really improving your house by doing the roof necessarily. You are maintaining your house. So,
So what I'm going to tell you is it doesn't matter what you do if you live in the floodplain. To be honest, I don't care if you build a birdhouse. It's development and it should be permitted by the municipality. The record should be kept forever. Now, using common sense, did I ever permit a birdhouse? Absolutely not. However, what I did in the municipalities I worked in, I came up with a two-part permit system. Essentially, the one was just here, I need to keep a record. Can you write down that you did some landscaping or something? They fill it out and I throw it in a file. The other side of it is, hey, I want to put an addition on. Okay, well, you trigger this actual review portion. So fill this out. We're going to sit, we're going to talk. And then I would actually issue them a permit. But essentially both parts are meeting the requirements of documenting what's going on in the floodplain. One just kind of takes a lot of the hassle out of it to say, okay, I know I'm bothering you. Can you take 10 seconds, give me a brief description and I'll take it and I'll be on my way. I would literally drive around, and if I saw somebody doing something that was very harmless, I would just say, hey, can you give me a brief description of what it is you're doing there? And they'd look at me like I had six heads, rightfully so. And I would give them a little explanation of why I'm doing this. And in reality, we were a CRS community. And we were trying to keep that rating level, actually trying to improve that rating level if possible. And part of that is record keeping. And they would typically at that point say, okay, thanks, you're helping me, get a lower policy premium, you're helping my neighbors, I'll give you this ridiculousness. And they'd fill it out and I'd be on my way. But yes, anything that happens in the floodplain, whether it's, replacing a roof, retiling a roof, replacing windows, all of it. Unfortunately, it's all part of it.
Just for context, the NFIP definition of development
Everything.
is any man-made alteration to improved or unimproved real estate. So any change that you make to the real estate, whether it's improved or unimproved, counts as development and theoretically should be permitted. But as Ken mentioned, within reason, right? I mean, are you going to require permits to put in azaleas? By the record, yes, that should be permitted, but we also know that doesn't make any sense. But like in a roof case or someone who's painting their house, they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just painting, in that case, that's up to the municipality to determine whether they're going to require that permitting. But it's when you see these patterns of just continued improvement over and over. And the whole reason why substantial damage and substantial improvement exists is it's not trying to unfairly target those properties. It's like the repetitive loss. But at some point, if we're having properties damaged that much or improved that much, we need to treat them like new construction. We can't just let them continue to exist in perpetuity because of the amount of damage that they're getting. So that's why those regulations were written the way they were.
And actually, as far as record keeping, we're fortunate now that our permit software has GIS capabilities. So if the floodplain touches the parcel as mapped by the county, it triggers a flag, and people get a question that says, what's the market value of your structure? And like, why am I getting this question? And the answer is, well, because the floodplain touches your property. And then we look at it more closely to say, does the actual structure touch it? And then we can determine that, no, it's just a piece of your property, not your structure, or it is your structure. And then we use that to get we check their version of market value with the county assessment database to look at the value of that improvement and any prior improvements to see if they've reached that substantial improvement threshold.
System. I'm sorry. As long as you have a system in place and you're using it fairly across the board, that's what you're going for. You don't want to use it for everybody. And then, well, my buddy's cousin will use this one. You know, you don't want to, obviously you don't want to go there.
As time's gone on, we've been better at record keeping. And actually, it's partly thanks to the community rating system.
I wanted to acknowledge that you're acting like a community rating system. Like that's the higher standards. You're going above and beyond. The fact that you're engaging and having that conversation.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
The floodplain regulations may not apply, but it's close enough that we just want to flag it.
Right.
And yes, county assessed value is the easiest way to go because that's free. You can pull it up. If they want to dispute it, especially with housing prices the way they are right now, if you want to spend $1,000 and go get an appraisal and bring it in and tell us what the market value is, we can go ahead with that too. But it should not be on Lower Makefield to have to make that, pay for those appraisals just to get that, you've just got to level set the expectations. So.
Yeah, I recently just had someone who said, well, can I just like take the market comps for nearby properties? And I just said, no, that's too much out there.
The appraisal might, but right. But if it's a
Yeah, the
certified
appraisal
appraiser,
might, yeah.
that's fine. But you can't just say, well, my neighbor sold their house for X and right. Yeah, that's.
One of the things that you mentioned as far as like the roof and stuff like that, well, we see a lot that we get calls in regards to those things where we get questions from municipalities, ones that aren't in the CRS communities and stuff like that. We see where your zoning does not require the permits for the roof, for the windows, for a siding. But when you live in those floodplain areas, you are required for permits for those. And that's a lot of confusion that happens sometimes, especially with third-party contractors. They're hired to the zoning says this. However, then you throw in the floodplain ordinance, they might not be aware of it. So there's some contradictions that occur there. So when you have that floodplain ordinance that's kind of encased within a zoning ordinance, it kind of contradicts itself sometimes and can be confusing. So that could be where sometimes there are questions in regards to this, where my neighbor didn't have to have a permit for, some roofing that they had done, but all of a sudden I have to go get a permit. This isn't fair. This is being unjust. Well, guess what? That little floodplain line kind of went right between your properties. You're in it, they're out. They don't have to have a permit for that. But, being in the floodplain, you are required to have that permit. So it does raise a lot of questions.
And I know we had talked about having a better disclosure thing. Is that something we could do on the local level, have a higher standard than the state for disclosure for real estate? Or are we constricted by the state regulations?
No, I didn't mean to choke on the question. That was that was not a delaying tactic. Anything you can do to increase the awareness, just the problem you need to get into is if you start targeting property by property and it decreases the potential value of the property, then you put yourself at liability if you're sharing that kind of privacy information. So that's something I'd want to carefully coordinate with the solicitor if you want to try to do something like that. I applaud that approach, but you want to make sure that you don't find out that the house at like 123 Maple Street has 15 claims and all of a sudden everybody starts talking and now they want to sell it and they can't get as much as everyone else around them, all because they had flood insurance and they have a claims history and they're being penalized for that. So I just want to highlight, we want to make sure that we're just not doing anything where someone could say your actions directly affected my property value, and singled me out. But
So that outreach is a key component to awareness is, okay, here are our floodplains, here's our flood maps, you know, kind of without giving addresses and stuff like that, without saying anything about repetitive claims, by having those maps available, the outreach there, at least those individuals that are looking at the websites and those materials are able to see where those areas are that are flood risk. What does it mean to be in a floodplain? All the things that are there. You're not targeting, you're making awareness out there. So it's a fine line to kind of teeter on.
And we're fortunate here in Bucks County. They've actually done a GIS parcel and floodplain viewer that you could call it up and kind of see what your flood risk may be.
Sure.
And of course, we always say, but you have to go by the FEMA maps. That's the official.
But it's also nice when you have that kind of GIS capability, because you can't do anything else with the FEMA maps. The FEMA maps are locked down tight, but you can start adding in some other information, maybe some more local information you'd want. If you've got like a riparian buffer setback or something, you can start playing with that. Whereas with the FEMA, tool, you're just locked into what FEMA shows. You can play around a little bit more. So nice to use both. Some more people come in. I'm not sure if anybody had any questions. We can, yeah, no, that's all right. You spoke at the task force last week, right? I thought I recognized you.
Sorry, sick
No.
kid at home and was waiting for coverage.
No.
I was listening during the Facebook broadcast, and you mentioned about previous loss claims.
Yep.
What if you've submitted to FEMA, but we haven't had insurance claims? We've submitted claims to FEMA 3 times in 12 years, but we don't have insurance claims because we didn't have flood insurance and they wouldn't even come out. So in terms of you were talking about the repeated loss.
What kind of claims did you, so you don't have NFIP, flood
No.
insurance?
Because we're not in the floodplain and,
You're-
you know,
Yeah. So what did you submit to FEMA? Like,
we submitted, well, twice we were eligible to submit because, no, there were 3 weather events. So 2 were tropical storms or remnants of tropical storms.
yeah.
And so we're able to. The last one was a federally deemed disaster, the one 2 years ago, so we're able to.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
So we've
Gotcha.
submitted claims, and so we have a history of just damage.
Damage. Yes.
and
Understood.
Receipts and all the things. But we don't have insurance claims, and I don't know how that factors into anything, or if it doesn't.
Yeah. There are slightly different programs. They do talk, but right. If you're so you went to like a disaster recovery center, opened up a case, and you provided that information for the
But we got
individual
a
assistance.
disaster number.
You're right.
and
Right.
then we submitted
Exactly.
Everything.
Yeah. Unfortunately, on the insurance side, even though our databases, we could check information, you would not have any of those losses in terms of like the
Historical
historical reference. So if you were to get insurance now,
Mhm.
it wouldn't go back and say, oh, you had a loss in 21 or 22 for that.
And, okay, that stinks. The other part of it is some of the structures of our houses are wildly interesting. The bi-level, split level, we're right next to each other and we have completely different layouts.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, sure.
And I don't know if this is a question for you or if it's a question to an agent, but there's been various information about what in our homes will be covered because part of it is a basement, but it's half of our living space. So it's not, an extra room, it's our living space. And I don't know if that's a question for you or that's a question to a provider.
Yeah, I can speak generally. And since you came in, we mentioned this earlier, we have insurance specialist contact forms back
Okay,
there
perfect. Thank you.
that if you want to fill out, I'm going to take them with me and then we can do targeted follow-up so we can
That'd be awesome.
specifically address, because we know like split levels and basements. I can say generally speaking for everyone in the audience, like in terms of basement coverage, it's extremely limited just because basements are the first thing to get flooded. So they're disaster prone. So yeah, if you have basement coverage, you're going to have, some of your mechanicals and equipment, your walls, structurally, your walls will be covered. Your couch, your TV, bed, sofas, anything like that. If it's turned into a livable space,
It
is
is,
not going to
yeah.
be covered,
Yeah.
but
Our home is our office, it's our den, it's half our house.
right. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. And
Like,
that's the
half of-
challenge.
like only this much of it is actually underground. It's the front of the house. The back of the house opens and it's flat. So it's always been a
So is it,
attention for us, like understanding.
that might not be a basement. For it to be a basement, it needs to be below grade on all 4 sides.
Okay.
So it might be a
Or
walkout.
mixed,
Yeah.
mixed.
So that's a good thing though. That's worth following up on though, because that goes back to, and I know you weren't here, but when we were talking about the ratings,
Mhm.
you know, if you're talking and you're being rated and someone puts in the wrong type of structure, it could kick out a wildly different premium if it's all of a sudden saying, oh, well, wait a minute, your walkout first floor is now being treated like a basement.
Mhm.
You could see a significant change in the premium. So we want to make sure
Okay.
the importance of getting the right building diagram.
Yes.
Yeah. So. Mhm.
Even if it just kind of creeps around the corner in the front and hits that fourth side.
Yeah. So that might be something worth looking at just to see how they rated it. Yeah.
I think that was all I had. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah. No, and I do really want to applaud you for having a forum like this. You know, these are very challenging conversations to have. You know, it's not easy to talk about flood insurance and mitigation and flood hazard because it's very personal. It's very destructive. And but I do want to commend you for coming out, telling us about your situations so that we can take that back and share that with our leadership. But I also want to commend, you know, the township, Yardley, you know, for your efforts with CRS and being proactive in floodplain management, because that's really where it starts a lot too, is, you know, recognizing the importance of these programs. You know, we're fortunate. You know, I love this stuff. I don't love disasters. I don't love people's despair or anything, but I'm really fascinated with flooding in the NFIP, and it's something I get to do as a career, but I know that it's one of many things that you do in your jobs, you know, at the borough and township level. But your commitment to sound floodplain management really should be commended, and you know, hopefully it sets a model for more communities. And I'm hoping the task force, that's, you know, it's something that's going to resonate with the task force, because I know that seems to be the CRS.
I know there's probably only one person that really kind of, you know, listened to a lot as far as community members for the task force stuff. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is when we talk about those community rating system communities, what you have to understand is how impressive it is for those that are in that system. So in Pennsylvania, keep in mind, we are a very kind of crazy Commonwealth. So we have over 2,500 plus municipalities. Okay. Of those, there's only about 34 communities that are not participating in the NFIP program that are mandated to participate. So all those other communities that have special flood hazard areas are participating in the NFIP program. So, and of those, 27 communities are CRS with those higher standards. So those that are going through to get those higher standards and to get those discounts in the communities, it is really, it's commendable for the municipalities that are doing this, because we know the struggles that are there. You know, and we see that from our area, and you can see that we work very closely with the federal government as far as our FEMA partners, because we know what it's like to not have that staffing, to not have the manpower. You know, just recently, you know, Ken was brought on board as the NFIP coordinator. So it's only two of us that are handling those NFIP, you know, questions, concerns, ordinance updates, map changes. We're funneling all that information comes into just the two of us for the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we know the struggles that are out there in the community and their limited resources that they have. So getting that rating is phenomenal. And we're so appreciative of them taking those additional steps. And just like the task force is trying to find things that are more affordable, we're also trying to look at what we can do to help more communities go into that program as well. So, you know, we're trying to take those additional steps. We do hear you. We're in this because we have a passion to help the communities. We want to be able to be there. That's why we're here this evening. We want to be able to reach out. How can we help residents? We want to hear what your stories are. We want to hear your frustrations, because that helps us to see what can we do? Where are limitations? What can we ask for additional resources? Where can we start pushing those buttons? Where can we have those conversations? Bill sees it all the time. That's why we bring him into a lot of our conversations that we have. I drag Bill around with me all the time.
A lot of miles on my car.
I know. It's great that he actually is, he's in PA, so, but he has to travel all around, FEMA Region 3. And it's a lot of different states that he has to travel in through, but he does have that passion and that takes a lot. So those communities that have the passion to go for get those extra, bonus points and getting those discounts, it's a lot. You guys are very fortunate to be able to live within this community to have that. Not sure if there's any other questions or anything that wants to be kind of spoken in regards to, but one of the things I want to touch base on real quick, don't go too far. Real quick is, so if you happen to move out of Lower Mayfield, you move into another community, what you've dealt with as far as flooding and stuff like that. You're looking at buying a second property and stuff like that. Keep in mind that because we're a Commonwealth, a lot of different participating communities, everyone has a slightly different twist on their floodplain ordinance. There might be higher standards where the freeboard could be 3 foot, or it might just be 18 inches. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. Some of them don't allow pools within floodplains. Some of them do. Some of them have certain regulations. Some of them have absolutely no fences whatsoever in certain areas. Some of them allow exceptions depending on where you are located within a floodplain. So when you're looking at those different areas, if you're looking to move in different areas, or you have relatives, children, whatever else that are looking, just keep in mind that your ordinance and your jurisdiction could be very different than another one. So you always want to take a look at that when you're looking at other areas and looking at those other properties as well. So even if your neighbor is in a different jurisdiction than you, they might have different requirements they have to do, even though they're in the same floodplain. Because their township is different, they might have different requirements as far as what they're required to permit. It could be substantial improvement, might not be 50%. Substantial improvement might be 40%. They might have a higher standard in there. So there's really weird caveats to it. So kind of, I just want to raise awareness in regards to that. I'm sorry, Jimmy, you may now stand.
Dave, do we have any people on the line with any questions? No questions online. So I don't know if anyone else here has anything to offer.
Real quick, I do want to mention, because it was brought up earlier, these volunteer organizations, how critical they are, and any chance to help develop one, promote them, see if you can build that local capacity, I think really helps, because in a lot of cases we go out after a disaster and we do our damage assessments, and unfortunately it doesn't meet the threshold, and so there's very little assistance outside of insurance. But the one thing that we do see consistently, and I had a nice conversation with Wes before he, it's these volunteer organizations that are out there. They show up and they're in there, they're mucking out houses, they're doing what they can. So, if you know that you're having these issues in these situations, is it a church group? Is it Rotary or something like that? But if you can band together to kind of help and, rely on those resources and support each other, I think that's going to go far, because that's consistent. Unfortunately, we can't always be there or help out in the best way, or there's too much red tape, but anything you can do to help build that local capacity, to help each other out, is commendable. So.
Yeah, and I just want to let everyone know that this is recorded on Zoom, so we'll have it on YouTube tomorrow. It'll be on our Facebook page that anyone could watch this and see the whole thing if you tune in a little bit late to get some of the answers that PEMA and FEMA were able to provide on flood insurance. And I want to thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate that. You answered a bunch of my questions that I know I had, and hopefully you were able to answer a lot of questions for the residents. And hopefully they thought it was valuable.
Yeah, and sorry if they weren't the answers you were hoping for, but if there's anything you have our contact information. That's one thing that I have always stressed, even when I was at the state level. It used to drive me crazy when I would send an email out and not get a response, or not even get acknowledged that there was a response or anything. So I have made it kind of my goal to be as responsive as possible. Now, I mean, we've got 6 states. It can be a little overwhelming at times, but we don't want anyone to feel like they're out on their own. If you have the questions, if you're curious about mitigation, if you're curious about insurance, floodplain management, if something doesn't sound right, let us know. We can get you in touch with the right people, but please use us as resources. You shouldn't have to know everything on your own. Come to us. We are here to help.
Yeah, and you did mention that you have that form if people have specific questions. What was the name of that form again?
Oh, the insurance specialist contact form is yeah, there's hard copies back there, which we can leave here. If anyone comes in and is complaining about something with insurance or some concerns, you can have them fill it out. You can email it to me or have them just reach out to us. We deal with those kind of, concerns. And sometimes we get good news too, which is always a plus. It's
We strive for the good news. We strive for the really good answers, it does. But, keep in mind, I mean, we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. Sometimes we're struggling just like you are to kind of understand some of the things that are occurring and why we don't have those answers. But we do have outlets that we can reach out to get additional resources. We can point you in the right direction. We might not be the person for it, but we're going to try to get you to where you need to as well. So always keep that in mind that we will try to help you wherever we can. That's part of what our job is. That's part of what our passion is try to help the communities.
And I really appreciate you coming out here.
Oh, no, but anytime. Happy to do it.
I like supporting the turnpike too.
Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge also this task force that's going on right now. That, this is something that Governor Shapiro, Representative Warren, Senator Sanacero, and others are on. I've been to all the meetings. It's a very proactive approach. I'm actually briefing out headquarters. They're interested to see how it goes, because the state is taking a proactive approach and a number of things are going to come out of it. But I think that, that's a proactive step for Pennsylvania. It's nice to see that we finally have, an administration and a group of elected officials who are trying to tackle this head on and keep working with them. I'm not going to say no.
Rainstorms. That's when we had everybody in.
Yeah, we
Van
dialed that up for
Nuys,
you to
Bill
make
was there,
sure.
yeah. Which was really great because they went out and did a tour and saw some of the stuff that was being dealt with. Of course, we've had a lot of rain since then too, but it was very interesting. They had the meetings and talked a lot about, they had people there from Philadelphia talking about the different abilities to the lack of knowledge and education is really big because people don't realize that the insurance stays with the property. But if you need to have flood insurance and it stays with the property, but people who are selling the property don't necessarily get informed about that until, there's some disclosure at the end. Sometimes mortgage companies will change the insurance if you take out a mortgage and not tell you until afterwards that some of the flood insurance is not covered. They also had a group from CEDACOG out in Susquehanna, Economic Development Committee, that were talking about the community rating systems, which is the CRS ratings, which, as you heard, Lower Makefield takes part in and is only one of 27 out of 250, 2,500 communities in the state that do that. And then we had Tom Hughes from PEMA who did a lot of discussion. So they're going to have another meeting. They're looking towards recommendations because this is a short-term task force about what they can do. So they were really looking about education and really looking for recommendations. If there's something that is popping up that that anybody here wants to discuss with either Representative Warren, who represents this community, or Senator Sanaciro, they are both on the task force, then feel free to reach out. You can talk to me after this meeting or reach out to our offices. But it is important, and it is definitely good to be proactive in these areas. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thank you to LMT for doing this.
And I also forgot to thank the residents who came out and asked the questions. It was really good and helpful, I think, to further the discussion.
Yeah, no, they're very challenging stories, and I appreciate you sharing them. And yeah, follow up with us, and we'll try to continue to get you some more information. Good or bad, let's get a definitive answer, just so you at least you know where you're going.